Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. I'm your host, Sarah Payne, and I'm bringing you fascinating conversations with some of the industry's top marketing minds. The topic of today's episode is how to stay relevant and create meaningful connections with our audience. I would argue this is more critical than ever. But how do we craft campaigns that truly resonate and drive impact? Joining me in the conversation today is a creative powerhouse from a leading branding agency who will share insights on how health marketing teams can achieve creative excellence. Our guest is Matt Sauter. Matt is a group creative director at Avalier Health. He leads agency teams that serve the health and pharmaceutical industries. He's passionate about drawing out the best in people and teams. His goal is to be the spark in someone's day every day and to help others do the same. How wonderful is that? Matt, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really passionate about this topic because creative excellence is just so central to health marketing success today. And there's been a real explosion of audiovisual storytelling the past couple of years. And let's be honest, effective creative execution is so critical to making those stories really stick and get noticed by your audience. And I know, Matt, from our past conversations that while you are a creative, you strongly believe that creativity should not be done for the sake of creativity. And we also shouldn't get too hung up on the big idea.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
we're going to focus our conversation on these points today. And let's start by talking about how we create meaningful connections with our audience. So how do you, Matt, define meaningful creativity in the context of health marketing?
Yeah, I first, I think I should say I'm not opposed to big or the big idea. And I think we should have big ideas.
Yes.
I do want to start with meaningful every time. And we can think of this as sort of significance instead of grandeur. So this is the idea that something is impactful to an individual. It doesn't just make a splash, it makes a difference. It creates value. It might remove a barrier or enable an outcome. It may help someone to feel seen. You often know this when you see it. There's certainly, we could try to define these things. We try to pin it down to really a concise statement, but there is some element of, you see this thing in the world and you go, oh, they cared enough to really create something meaningful there. There's this X factor to it sometimes.
Oh, for sure. I mean, for me, meaningful ideas are the ones, to your point, that are going to drive the biggest impact.
Yeah.
In healthcare, there are so many issues that can be solved through greater education of different audiences, and choosing to be the brand that's going to bridge that gap is meaningful, right? Choosing to lean in on issues-based marketing or thought leadership is meaningful and is going to have a bigger impact, I believe, than taking out a bunch of branded ads. And that might be an uncomfortable truth for some people, but I think it takes courage to really spend your marketing dollars in that way, in serving your audience and advancing the industry forward, advancing the conversation versus just pushing your product.
Yeah, and I think people expect that more than they used to, don't they? Like,
yes,
it's not uncommon to have a brand that cares about a problem, a brand that's here because they're passionate about something. And yeah, maybe there's this product or service along the way, but really they're showing up for a person. There's an audience that they're rallying around, and folks expect that more now than ever.
And not only do they expect it, but I think we've started to see this get proven out in surveys and in research that it also is the right thing to do for business, right? Like, people want to spend their dollars with brands that, are making an impact, are, driving positive momentum, positive change in the industry. So it isn't just because, people like it, right? Or they want it. It's it actually makes an impact on their pocketbook.
Yeah. I mean, there's some element of authenticity there too, where it's like, hey, there are some things
Right.
you buy. I don't need a toothbrush brand that's out here to do some bigger thing necessarily. Although maybe, I guess I don't actually know.
Maybe.
But there are some things like this is a transaction. But
sure,
in the health industry, like there's a real big impact that we can make. And the issues posed to individuals with a variety of conditions or perhaps procedures they need, whatever it is, these are not small things. This isn't buying a toothbrush. And so it makes sense that within our industry, we would find that folks want to put their dollars and their goodwill behind brands who are going to do the same for them.
100%. Do you have any examples, Matt, of some campaigns where you're seeing brands really focusing on this idea of meaning, where we can see look at how successful that campaign was. They chose to focus on meaning, and look at how big that became.
Yeah, I'll share an example that feels big, and I can share a more general sort of example that's just about meaning.
Awesome. Love it.
The purpose of that on its own. The bigger one I just learned about this week on the heels of the Cannes Awards. Like this thing just won some awards. Like that already is kind of like, okay, yeah, folks are recognizing this is big. And it was with Siemens Healthineers, where so you might have heard of this. Like they recently did something in the MRI space where they looked at their MRI machines, which can make noises louder than a military jet. And they said, like, wow, this is scary for a kid. I mean, for an adult too, but like they said, this is scary for a kid. Think about all the children who need MRIs as part of a variety of treatments, just monitoring, et cetera. Like, do they really need the fear layered on top of their treatment? Like, this is a barrier to adherence.
Yeah.
So, but the noises made, I get so sorry about this. The noises made during any specific type of scan is predictable. They know what the machine is going to sound like and when it will sound that way. So Siemens created audiobooks timed to the scans performed.
Oh, that's so cool.
Like the most common pediatric scans. And so now when a child listens to this audiobook, when they're in the machine, a scary noise becomes part of the story.
It's like a soundtrack to your favorite movie.
Yeah, chugging becomes a train. There's like an alien outer space noise. I don't remember what all of them are, but they took a barrier and they didn't shy away from it. They made it something special. I think there's even a book that these kids take home so they can read the stories and look forward to returning again. And to me, that's meaningful and big. Like, what a difference for these kids, and what a great example of considering the larger experience and not being constrained by a message map or an existing marketing plan.
I love that. That's such a great example. Thank you for sharing that.
Every time. Yeah, you're welcome.
You said you had another example.
Yeah, like more general, not a specific example, but I think meaningful isn't always big, and sometimes we can forget that. Think, for example, of an individual newly diagnosed with some condition. Whether it's rare, whether it's common, whatever, oftentimes individuals don't know what they don't know. And discussions with a doctor can be less productive than their potential when these folks don't even know what to ask, when we don't even know what to ask. Something as simple as a printable doctor discussion guide can cover that gap. It's meaningful.
Yeah.
It's value for the individual. It improves their experience. And I'm not saying we should stop there. But sometimes as marketers, we can miss this stuff either because we're focused on big first, or we see these things as an optional box to check, even though for a patient in that moment, this is novel and helpful. So these are the things I want to move to making more of table stakes while we reach for meaningful plus big.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good reminder for so many of us that do this day in and day out, is not to take those things for granted and to really prioritize more I'm going to call it basic, right? A more basic deliverable that can be very transformative to someone in their journey of receiving healthcare.
Yeah, we don't stop there, but don't skip the basics either, and don't count them out. Like, sometimes the basics are the basics for a reason. Like, even when we get tired of these things, we're like, oh, we've done 1,000 of these, whatever. Right. But this patient could be the first one they've ever seen. It's still.
Yes. And I think that's such an important point too, because, to your point, we are in this, we've been there, we've done that, but even if you, so let's say, you've been working with a brand, or you're an agency team supporting a brand for 5 years plus.
Yeah.
But remember, that person just received that diagnosis for the first time today or tomorrow, and their journey just started. So while your journey as a brand leader or creative director might have started 5 years ago, and those things seem like old hat, the patient's journey just started at point zero today. And that's where those same tactics and deliverables are so important not to be pushed aside.
Yeah, I think the same thing happens with our messaging too, where we can say we've done how much all with this key message or whatever. And absolutely, we should pivot in pursuit of relevance. But we also, the same as what you just described, we have to remember, like, this might be the first time that somebody has seen X message. And we are going to tire of much of this before our audience does.
Yeah, well, you brought up relevance, so I want to go there.
Sure.
What are some key strategies for ensuring that your health marketing program, your campaign, those efforts remain relevant?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to dig into here. I mean, a few examples would be don't get caught in the sunk cost fallacy. Pivot when you need to. I think we need to be willing to let our plans and our message maps and all of these very good things be a guide and not a prison. I think staying relevant means that we change when we need to with our audience. But I think on very much the other end of this, the other side of this, also, like, don't get caught in trends. I think focus more on what your audience needs than on what others are doing, and certainly apply anything relevant. Don't fear trends, but don't chase them. Remember that you don't have to be part of everything. Don't be drawn away by the siren song. Don't lose focus. Remember relevance first. But part of this is about changing with your audience and anticipating them.
Yeah, and how do you do that? How do your teams do that, on behalf of your clients? Things move at a fast pace in this industry. Change is perhaps the only constant, right? How do we get really good at anticipating the changing needs and the preferences of our audiences?
Yeah, research is huge. I also believe big time in listening first, in general, not just for this, but in general, let's seek first to understand. Certainly, let's do that with our audiences. I think there's many ways to do that, and an excellent one available to us these days is social listening. Keeping a finger on the pulse of an audience, monitoring sentiment, change in sentiment, looking at actual specific posts, thoughts, etc., understanding where our audience's heads are at in near real time. You can pivot based on that. But I'm also a fan of knowing who your people are and talking to them. Let's not just talk about our audiences. Let's talk to our audiences, stay in direct, constant, ongoing communication with representatives of them.
Yeah.
There's also, we see excellent opportunities to co-create with our audiences nowadays, make things together, engage with communities and advocacy groups. I just think, I think you've got a much better shot at staying relevant if you make the effort to stay connected and engaged with actual people. And I think that through great listening and research and feedback loops, you can get there. This is within reach.
I agree with you. And I feel like unfortunately, not every brand has the luxury of budget to support audience research, very thorough, in-depth audience research, right? But it doesn't mean we can't get scrappy or creative about that, right? Can we bring in a small handful of people and do some conversations and listening there and really understanding what their needs are, what their fears are, what their problems are, and really build our strategy and our messaging around that? Because I think we can fall into this trap of making assumptions. We know them. This is what they feel, think, and do, versus actually asking and listening to that. And I was just sort of curious, Matt, what percentage of campaigns that you work on have the luxury of that, actual dollars line item earmarked for research?
I'd say a decent percentage of them, but it often depends obviously on the scale of the thing. But sometimes
Sure.
where a brand is in its life cycle, oftentimes they know their audience very well and they've seen perhaps there's not a lot of change in the space.
Sure.
For some clients that I've worked with, certainly they've been able to observe like a whole industry maybe hasn't had a lot of change in belief in quite a long time. And those are times where we're not going to invest as much in ongoing research. But when you don't know, that's when you need to.
Right.
And to your point, we can get scrappy. Like it doesn't have to be, let's do constant ongoing social listening. It might be, let's spend the time, the money, the effort to identify who are the influential individuals in an area, who's everyone else already listening to, and let's go listen to them too. Why is anyone else's belief shifting? What are those reference points? Can we monitor those, even if it's just someone that's already on the team, not building a new function?
Yeah, I love those examples you give of ways to, be creative inside of what might be a more limited budget, right? Maybe you don't have that budget available to go truly in depth, but there are a lot of methods and opportunities given social media to get creative.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about engineering the environment for great work. I know this is something that you're really passionate about. What do you see as some of the elements that create an environment where creativity and innovation can thrive, whether you're working on an in-house brand team or collaborating with external partners?
Yeah, I think you do need to engineer it, as you said. You can't just tell people you want this. You have to be a part. You have to make it possible. It's about, in my mind, sort of creating the environment which more naturally produces the outcomes that you desire. And in the examples we're going to talk about, it's sort of the environment in which great creative work can happen. And I think you have to start fundamentally and foundationally with just all the things you need for any high functioning team. Because for creativity and innovation to happen consistently and sustainably, the team does need to be high functioning. Yeah. And so, some of those, there's a lot here that folks who've done much more thinking about it than I have can cite. But, items such as psychological safety.
Yes.
Giving folks ownership plus support. Developing clear objectives and expectations, both about the task at hand and about the roles and purposes of individual folks on your team. Like, you need all of this. But then when we think about creativity and innovation, there are a few extra things that I like to focus on. And the two sort of categories that come to mind for me are, first, to nurture curiosity and playfulness. We want to build a place where people ask questions and dig deeper. They ask better questions. They ask more of those questions. They're always trying to learn about their audience, about the problem, the objective, about their team. All of this. Curiosity is so important in creativity. And I think we have to model it. But yes, that second half, playfulness, we have to model that too. And there's all sorts of thinking about the role of the play state in creativity. But even without that, even without the idea of how much better it can make the work, just think about how much better it can make the team. When they can get a little loose, they can get a little weird together. If we can set the right tone, like, these teams they're going to be more comfortable coming to the table with what they might otherwise not be comfortable sharing. So that first bucket to me is sort of nurturing the curiosity and playfulness. After that, I think about training others to see. And I think this is sort of the task for someone in a creative career, like for their whole career, is just learning more and more how to see. This is, in my mind, practicing the art of deconstruction, where we look at something and we learn to see it for more than the Go again. We can look at something and learn to see it as more than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
We see what makes it up. And I think when we can pull something apart, when we can see the pieces to it, we don't just have a capacity then to better critique the work or better improve it. We can see how each piece of this works. And some of those you look at the thing out there in the wild that you love and you start to understand, why do I love it? Why does anyone else love this? And what of it can I apply? So when you're practicing this art of deconstruction, you're learning not just to be inspired by the thing, but educated by it. And if you can train that in your teams, like, you can go a whole lot.
Yeah, this is really awesome, amazing stuff. And it's making me think of the actual most recent episode that we went live with. It was all about strategic thinking. It was with Mary Rappaport. If you haven't listened to it, Matt, I encourage you to listen to it. But it's all about being what you're talking about is being intentional with playfulness and, deconstructing something. And Mary had very similar thoughts about strategic thinking, that we as a society, as a workplace culture, have become very much about our to-do list, right? I've been told these are the things I need to go do. So we, like good little worker bees, get up and we do the thing, right? And it's about efficiency. It's about go from this meeting to that meeting. And if we don't actually reserve the time to think strategically, and in this case, think creatively, it's no wonder it's not happening, right? Like our brains aren't really wired to function tactically and strategically at the same time unless we're very intentional about it. So I wondered, Matt, if you could give some examples, like give us this, sneak peek inside of your team, and like what are some of those, like how are you doing this? How are you taking these tips and putting them into actual practical application, particularly this concept of playfulness, right? Like, are you actually reserving time on people's calendars where you're, whatever you're doing? Because I will tell you, like, I'm just going to give some examples of my world and what works for me is if I'm trying to do something either strategic or creative or both of those things, frankly, at the same time, going for a walk is tremendously helpful for me. My brain fires very differently when I'm for a walk. And there's some research out there that indicates that that's actually proven, scientifically proven, to produce better results. And then there's something weird about being on a plane. I think it's the lack of distraction, right? Yeah. Like you don't have the constant barrage of email and text messages and, your phone to be distracting you, where like I can look out the window and literally see blue sky, right? It's that blue sky thinking while you're in the blue sky. Yeah. I don't know, like I'm trapped in this, metal container flying through the air, and I just suddenly things just feel a lot more clear. So I just wondered, what you do with your team to be very intentional about this.
Yeah. So at first, completely agreed with all of that. And it's the shower thing too, right? As long as it's in the showers, people have been having ideas in them.
I know. And everyone's always creeped out when you say that. I thought of this when I was in the shower this morning, right? Yeah. So sometimes you have to edit yourself out, but I do believe I don't have one, but boy, would I love to have a whiteboard at the shower.
I think they make those. Yeah. Yeah. You sitting there and telling yourself to be creative isn't really going to get you far. Muscling it doesn't really do it. That's not how the brain works. There's a ton of research, as you suggested, about all of this. But you're talking about building habits, right? Like we're teaching people to be creative. And I think first, you do have to make space for these things. And I mean temporally, like you need to make the time for this. Creativity can and does happen in the margins. But if we want it to thrive, give it more space.
Yeah.
But you have to make venues for it also, platforms and such. And I think that's more what you're talking about. And I mean, it can be something as small as creative inspiration channels on Teams or Slack or whatever. Just start talking about what you see in the world. This is a place for people to take what they saw, put it somewhere, and talk about it.
Yes.
You can have You could have monthly workshops to take some of that and deconstruct it and dream about how to apply it back to your own business. We do rapid team exercises. I love these things. I have a whole thing that I start brainstorm sessions with that I call the emoji Thunderdome, where it's a bunch of prompts and people can only answer in a series of emojis. You're just trying to get people loose, but all sorts. There's a ton of different rapid team exercises that are just about getting people thinking in different ways. You could have a goal to produce X number of ideas quarterly against a defined problem. We're not looking to make busy work, but we are
right.
Habits. We're trying to get people thinking about this. We're trying to make it part of a culture.
Yeah, we do some of this too, where we will, make it, because if you don't set a goal around it and you don't create milestones, it's not going to happen. Right. So we do set some of those goals. It's like, okay, for every client, we have to have X number of new ideas in this given period of time, not to, as you said earlier, force it, because that's not, you can't just like, let's sit down and be creative. That's not going to work, but to encourage the habit building around it and to encourage people to set aside the time for it. I'm going to make you make a promise to me today. I need to get invited to this emoji Thunderdome experience. Either if I could just be a fly on the wall for that, or actually participate, I don't care. I just need to see this.
It's a good time.
Yeah. So I love this idea of rapid team exercises too, because I do think we are in a world now with AI, let's be real, where the push for speed in thinking, ideas, and actual work is going to accelerate. And while we cannot force ourselves to just be creative at the drop of a hat, I think we have to kind of train our brains to be able to produce good faster. And what it really is about is the psychological things that hold us back from doing that. To your earlier point, if you don't have psychological safety, you have fear of a dumb idea, or fear of looking ridiculous in front of your colleagues, or like, we have to get over that. We have to be willing to jump right into the messy middle and throw a bunch of things up and say, there's got to be something good here. What's going to rise above? Let's take that thing. Let's go make it. Let's go just spend 45 minutes making that good, and then, put it in front of a client. And if they say no, we only spent 45 minutes, right? Like, what's the big deal? At least wouldn't the client appreciate the fact that we're coming up with new ideas and presenting them with things on the fly, versus needing to get 20 people in a room 2 weeks from now to have a 4-hour like, there's value in that. Don't get me wrong. But I do think we're entering this era where, consciously or not, the drive and expectation for good work fast, good and cheap AI is going to drive that. Right. And so it's like, buckle up, right? We're going to have to unbundle some of that psychological stuff that might hold us back from the willingness to sort of jump in with both feet.
Yeah. And I think part of what that requires is thoughtfulness in the hiring process, because all of these exercises with the team we already have, we're building new neural pathways and trying to deeply carve the ones we already have, the good ones we already have. Like that's what the people we have, but like the hiring process is so important too. Like this is an opportunity for us to choose great people who care about the work and the folks around them who can get a little weird together, who contribute to the psychological safety. It's not like the most creative people at any cost. Like, you're building a team and an experience. And if folks are going to feel safe and empowered to do everything we're talking about, we do have to be thoughtful about who we're throwing together and the environment that develops. And I feel like it's important to remember that day by day, this is people's lives.
Yes.
So let's make a place and a crew that they want to spend it with, and trust that good stuff can come as we shape and hold an environment for these lovely people where they can get loose and creative together and just move with the times.
Yeah, and to your point, part of that is hiring and being very clear about the culture, right? That of the team that they're joining, so they can self-select in or out of that, right? And sort of know what they're walking into. But then it's also the living up to that experience when they come in and making sure we're surrounding them with the right support where they do. It takes time. It takes time when you're new to that team and everybody else already has sort of that social bond and that, like, we've done this together before. We've done the emoji Thunderdome. We know what we're doing, right? But to support them and allow them to, because I see people that enter a high performance culture, like ours, so quickly their imposter syndrome these are really talented people that we hire to join our team, and very quickly confidence levels can drop and imposter syndrome can come up for everybody. It's about how does the team that they're stepping into rally alongside of them and say, we hired you for a reason. We want you and your unique experience.
Yeah.
Come in with us. It's safe here. Like
Yeah.
literally having that conversation in some instances and inviting them into that. I agree so much with everything that you just said. And I think you might have just come up with the episode or the title for this episode. Would you say, let's get weird together?
Oh man, I use that word so much. People always know. They're like, Matt wants us to get weird together.
Let's get weird together. I love that.
And that's, to everything you just said, like, I think that's such a powerful thing. We don't get weird enough.
Let's not take ourselves too seriously. Like, this is important stuff. This is healthcare, right? This is literally people's lives in many instances, day in and day out. But the work that we're doing in marketing doesn't have to be taken that seriously, because we have to be able to let the guard down. We have to be able to, not get too rigid with regulatory. Obviously, regulatory compliance is important, but let's not start with that, right? Like, let's start with creativity and what seems to be right for the audience, what's meaningful for the audience, and then back into filtering out, for all of the important regulatory filters later. Well, Matt, I feel like we could keep getting weird together for a really long time here, but I'd like to switch gears for a quick fire segment.
Sure.
I've got 5 questions for you. How do you stay inspired and motivated in your creative work?
I am not one of those people that goes and does the same thing outside of work. I want to be a rounder person. I want more reference points. And so for me, I'm a big reader. My wife used to be a children's librarian. My kids like to read. Like, we are book people. So for me, I'm not just exposing myself to other reference points. I'm exposing myself to other worlds and other ways of thinking. But, it's also about hobbies. It's about all of these other things, and you start to think in different ways by doing different things. So part of it, I think, is what are the things I see that I can deconstruct, that I can be inspired by. But there's also, what are the things I can do that will cause me to think differently and to have experiences I otherwise would not, which I can apply back. When it comes to inspiration, more specifically, I am that person that looks at everything around them and picks it apart, not to, drag it through the mud or anything, but just because I'm curious. I'm very curious, and I want to see how everything works. And so it's literally everything around me. And also, there are things I follow on Instagram and YouTube and this and that, where it's just these people are doing great work, and I love seeing what they do and how they think. I am more attracted to sources that let me see the thinking, where it's not, hey, here's a roundup of the 10 best XYZ. Those things have their place. But I love to watch somebody figure it out.
Yeah.
Fail a little along the way and get somewhere incredible, because it teaches me more how I can do the same. Maybe I can skip the fail part if I saw them do it. We'll see.
Love that. What's your favorite brainstorming technique? I know you already shared one, the emoji Thunderdome approach, but what else do you have in terms of brainstorming techniques that work really well?
I think of moves such as that as the icebreaker, which partly is to get people to open up, partly is to get them to think different. But I think that's important because it helps us to set tone. When we make our icebreaker, insert whatever adjective, weird or whatever it is, we're essentially saying, in this space, here's where we can go together. So that's very important. But the bulk of the time together, always plan ahead. never show up and be like, hey, what ideas do people have? I am big on structured brainstorming, and I meet with my folks. I lead other leaders, and so they're leading brainstorming efforts and all sorts of things. And we will sometimes meet together ahead of work that they are facilitating. Say, okay, what do you want out of this? What are you trying to get to? Okay, let's break that down and figure out what are some questions we could ask, and not even direct questions. What get us into the type of solution we might want? What's one dimension of it that we can spend some time on together before we move on to something else? And then in the virtual whiteboard session, these folks have a whole plan that they could step the team through, and we're tightly controlling. But I don't want to go too wide. I want to focus. That's part of how we get to meaningful before we go big. So you go one at a time, structure it for sure.
Earlier, the deconstruction element, right? Part of what you're doing in that brainstorm is you're being like, well, let's just talk about this like sort of sub segment of the issue or the audience or whatever, really dive deep on that versus trying to solve at the highest, level of the sort of 100% approach. What's your go-to tool or software for creative work?
It really is like the virtual whiteboard, whether that be, freehand, Miro, whatever. There's a bunch of them out there. I love how unstructured you can be, and then how structured you can get. It's very helpful, and we use those to generate ideas. We also use those to document and for all sorts of stuff. But I'm also a plain text document person, like not even Microsoft Word. Like give me the little text edit app on my computer, and I turn off the rich text formatting. It's just plain text. So I can just get stuff out there, and it's impossible for me to format it, to add anything. Just like getting something out there in its most raw state.
That's great.
I like the constraints that we can place upon ourselves with various tools to force ourselves only to go to the piece we're trying to get to. Yeah.
What's one common mistake you see in healthcare marketing campaigns?
Trying to be like other healthcare marketing campaigns. I think our entire industry has been working very hard to escape a past. There have been no shortage of amazing breakthroughs and treatments and all these ways for us to service patients. But on the marketing side, let's be honest, we're a lot better right now than as an industry we used to be. And I love when any brand in healthcare says, hey, what great thing do we want to do? And not what great thing do we want to do in healthcare? Like remove that from your criteria. Obviously, like you said earlier, obviously we're going to get in front of regulatory bodies and everything, but just focus on excellent visual design. Focus on content that is completely breakthrough. Focus on marketing that is just actually just the best there is. And hey, by the way, we happen to be doing it in healthcare, pharma, whatever.
Yeah, amen to that. What's your favorite way to unwind after a long day?
So I recently took up crosswords. I enjoy it as long as they're the easy ones, because I'm not looking to be challenged at that point. I'm trying to unwind. I like when you get into a rhythm with it. But again, I'm a reader. I'm a walker too. I love to escape to the outside alone.
Yeah.
I don't even want to walk through the woods. I want to walk to the woods and then sit there and just kind of listen and be and observe. I think we'd all be better off if we spent more time just being and not as much time doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great place to end things. I think, Matt, this was a real pleasure. I had a blast talking with you today. Thank you so much for being here. How can our listeners get in touch with you?
I think LinkedIn is probably the best. I think you'll probably link that in the show notes. Folks can follow the link, send me a message. I'm happy to field questions or congratulations or whatever you have for me.
Awesome. So be sure to follow Matt on LinkedIn. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, do us a favor and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That's it for today. Thanks to all of you for being a part of the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. because the future of healthcare depends on it. We'll see you next time.